Afternoon is Ken Travers. He's from AIG, and he is an expert on business continuity, COOP, from the insurance company. We also have sitting over there Ken Dunn. Hey, Ken. Ken is also from AIG, and he works very closely with SORM when we do our loss control inspections, organising all that information. They're one of the primary carriers on the bottom of our insurance program. It's a pleasure working with you, Ken, so thank you so much. We'll also be having Chris Connolly come back up and talk a little bit about how the property program addresses business continuity as well. And Maureen, if you have any comments to add into this, please feel free as well. Sure. Thank you. At this point, I'll hand it over to you, Ken.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, good afternoon. It's really tough to be in this slot. I got to come after your lunch, all that kind of good stuff. But it's great to be here. It got me out of the Northeast. And yesterday was storm number 13. And it brought us up to 63 inches for the season on an average of 25. I did check it out with Captain. Matter of fact, if you ask me about the end, I'll show you all my pictures looking down the street with the miles of snow about this high. It's unbelievable. Which is a good lead-in to what we're going to talk about, business continuity planning. I know Maureen talked earlier on continuity operations planning. BCP is basically the same type of thing. It's just typically BCP is in for-profit business, where revenue and cash flow and those sorts of things become a big issue. It's not that it's not a big issue in your sector either. So we'll talk a little bit about that. You'll see a lot of similarities between the two. There's probably going to be some overlap. That's why I apologize that I don't zip through those things that I saw Maureen already talk about. So today, let me see if I can get the there we go. Left, right, here. So anyway, good afternoon. My name is Ken Travers. As Michelle said, I'm with AIG. I sit on the global technical engineering team, and my specialty and background, at least now, is business continuity planning, business impact analysis, business interruption, supply chain risk, and those sorts of things for our clients. We actually support our engineers, like Ken, sitting over there, our account engineers and our field engineers globally, developing standards, developing tools. I'm in the middle of developing some very robust business impact analysis tools, things that you'll probably see as a client in the not too distant future. But today we're going to talk about business impact analysis first. I know Maureen talked maybe a little bit about this. I'm going to start off by discussing a little bit about the cost of downtime. Some of this is very obvious. Some of it may not be so obvious. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what a business impact analysis really is and why you want to go through the trouble of doing it, because it is time consuming. It does require resources. So we want to make sure that we understand what we're going to get out of going into the process, because it is a bit intensive. What are some of the fundamentals of conducting business impact analysis? What really do you need to have to make it successful? If you're not going to get the benefit out of it on the back end, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put all the time in front. And we'll talk about some of those benefits as well. Then we'll move into business continuity, COOP. Some of that is going to be a little repetitive from what Maureen talked about, but I'll run through my slides rather quickly on that. We'll talk a little bit about how to integrate business impact analyses into the business continuity planning process, or the COOP process. We'll talk about how to do that and some of the pitfalls, some of the issues you need to concern yourself with. We'll talk about planning teams. In your world, it's a little different acronym. In our world, it's BCP, BCP teams. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about testing, simulations, those sorts of things that some of our clients actually spend a lot of time and resources to go through to make sure that they're ready for that event that they hope doesn't occur, obviously. And then I want to finish up with talking about regional events. This is becoming, for our company and many of our clients, is becoming a real issue. It's driven a lot by natural catastrophe, not just natural catastrophe, though. So we'll talk about regional impacts, and we'll talk about some recent examples. We'll look at some of the events that have occurred that have kind of opened up everybody's eyes as to how they need to think about these types of disruptions from a business interruption and continuity of operations perspective. And we'll talk about planning for those and so forth. I got to remember, I've got my notes here and I've got the screen here. I'll just skip through that. So the first thing I really want to talk about is, the cost of downtime. And what do I mean by that? About 50% of the businesses that undergo a real major disruption or suffer some sort of a major interruption or disaster, without a recovery plan in place, never open their doors again. Almost 50%, that's rather significant. And you can think in the private marketplace where you have companies that are producing products, selling services to clients and things like that, it's very crucial for them to get back in operation and keep that customer base. Customer base to them is lifeblood. Okay? But it does roll into your world too, for the agencies and things like that. Some of you maybe here from colleges and universities, I worked with several of those. We'll talk in one of the examples toward the end about an event last week that affected not one of our clients, but the university is very close to it. Also, the cost of downtime in terms of just the financial impact can be dramatic. It can be up to, some companies say that just a downtime of a few days can run into the millions of dollars for them. Okay. So without mitigation plans in place, things that will help us, get the business, the operation, whatever your entity is, back in some semblance of order following that major disruption that we hope won't come, is really, really crucial. It's very difficult to quantify this in terms of dollars, time, and resources. We sometimes can quantify the severity of the impact, how long we think you might be out, or you might, the restoration process, recovery might be, but it's a very difficult thing in advance to predict that. And the problem with that is it makes it difficult to do the cost-benefit analysis. I heard Marty talking about management buy-in, which I'll refer to. Trying to get upper management to buy into the process, spend money, spend resources, and time. You have to be able to demonstrate what that benefit for that cost. And quantifying this is a real difficult thing, but we'll talk a little bit about that as well. It also may be, your disruption may be subject to other dependencies or what we call interdependencies. Interdependencies are those things that are internal to your network or organization. So owned operations, owned facilities. Things that you rely on from others, maybe other agencies or other locations, that are part of your network. Okay? Dependencies can be where you depend upon other operations or other facilities to provide you with services, with resources, with manpower, whatever the case might be. So there's really 5 buckets that I like to put this in terms of what the impact is from an overall kind of a cost impact standpoint. So I dump them into productivity and then revenue, financial terms, reputation, and just all the other things. So we're going to talk about each one of these individually. So first, let's talk about productivity. We use this term, obviously, when we're dealing with, in the public sector, you're dealing with predominantly just, employees, service employees, people that are providing goods and services to others within your network, within your state, your city. But some of the issues that may have an impact may be impacting your own employees, their ability to continue to work, their ability to earn a paycheck, and those sorts of things. So you can have a pretty dramatic impact on your employees. Production hours can be cut, can be short. You may lose, in some cases, you may lose some key employees in the process because they have to relocate. If you look what happened to Hurricane Katrina, a significant amount of the population relocated out of New Orleans. Some ended up, a lot of them ended up in Texas. So when you have a massive event like that, it's not just the cost. It can be you losing some really key people that are instrumental to your business. In the private sector, this could be true to some extent the public sector. This deadline. If you can imagine a company that's in the process of producing and selling products, major products that represent, several months or even years for the manufacturing process, the market, and the event disrupts them before they get to the delivery stage. You can imagine what happens. They can just miss those deadlines. They can have significant contract penalties that they have to. So the cost can be very, not necessarily upfront things that you may not think about. And it's purely the opportunity cost. Just the opportunity cost that you have to turn your attention away from your normal course of business to deal with this event and all the things that go with it. Okay? means that you're not putting that attention, your resources, your manpower on your day-to-day and maybe other big projects that you want to get out of the door. So those are some of the things that we talk about when we look at productivity. On the revenue side, and Chris will get up and talk a little bit about some of the insurance coverage aspect. To some extent, you're going to be covered for some things. There may be some things that you're not. Typically, your business interruption insurance programs are providing gross loss protection or loss of profits. Okay, but it could be lost future revenue. So if the event disrupts you to the point where you can't do normal business for a long period of time, it can have a pretty dramatic long-term impact on your future revenue and cash flow. Investment losses, again, that can be where you have to move resources in from your investments, especially as a private company, to use that to help recover from the disaster or the event that may be impacting you. And then on the financial front, the financial performance, revenue recognition, cash flow. Cash flow can be a problem. It may be less so in your side of the coin, but it can be a really big drain on your operations. I'll talk a little bit about in the example later on about some of the things that our team found with Superstorm Sandy, which we felt back in October 2012. And it gets right to the cash flow front. We'll talk about that. Loss discounts for those that are purchasing products and goods. Maybe you don't have the ability to buy the volume or to even make those purchases that otherwise were planned. Maybe lose those discounts. And it can have a pretty significant impact on credit. So those are some of the financial performance. Damage reputation. This is one that's really, really significant. Reputational risk is something that once you have an impact on, you very rarely can get your reputation back to where it was before. No matter how good you try, how hard you try, and all the good things that you might do, if you have an outage that impacts your constituents, they remember that. Okay? In the private sector, they may not come back to you. Right? So that can be a pretty dramatic thing. So customers, suppliers. Suppliers, if they have a lot of demand because of an event, and they know that they don't have a contract with you to supply you with some amount of services or products or goods, they may move those products elsewhere if they think that you're shut down or maybe you're not going to recover for some long period of time. And in financial markets, banks, other business partners, and things of that nature. So reputational risk is a real key thing, and it'll affect you folks as well. And then other costs. Costs of maybe getting temporary employees, temporary staff people in to help try to get things back to normal. Renting specialized equipment, whether that's simply generators or whether it's other sorts of things. In New York, with Superstorm Sandy, we had buildings that were actually AIG had 5 key buildings in downtown Manhattan. We had 3 of them that didn't reopen for 4 months. Now, fortunately for us, we had a BCP in place. All of our employees were able to work at other locations. We had those people move. But nonetheless, we had to spend an awful lot of money on a lot of things. We'll talk about that. Things that maybe wouldn't otherwise were thinking we probably wouldn't plan. Overtime costs, extra shipping costs, just to get materials here. When we talk about these regional events again, so it's a big event. It's not just your facility that's impacted. It's a lot of facilities like you that are impacted. And it can be outside of your local area in your town. It can be regional. So a lot of people are trying to do the same thing as you. So if you're not planning in advance to have those contracts in place, to have those relationships in place, guess what? You're the low man on the totem pole when the event happens. Because everybody, the demand, we call it demand surge, is just through the roof. And there's only so much supply in a short period of time. And other expenses, maybe legal obligations that you have to make, maybe the payments you still have to make, even though your organization might be in a non-operational mode. Okay, so what is a business impact analysis? What is that? Really, it's a methodical process that we go through to try to understand what different types of disruptions, first off, might impact our operation. What we might be suspect to based on our location, or maybe based on the type of operation that we run. Down here, you probably don't have to worry too much about the snow that we saw. But you do have to worry about ice cream, right? You might have something like that. What's that?
Even the tiniest ones.
Yeah. Even the tiniest ones. That's right. So, it's a process by trying to identify what are the real things that we have to worry about. because something that Maureen talked about, she made a very good comment, and that is, and I'll reiterate this, keep it simple. Really focus in on the few impacts that are most critical to your organization and that have things that are going to be either franchise threatening or can present a very significant disruption. Everything else kind of has to be moved to the back and can be window dressed. What you're really going to be concerned about is what's going to take you down and what's going to leave you down. Okay? Could be fire, could be floods, could be natural, other types of natural hazard events. So we're trying to really understand all those impact disruptions through that business impact analysis. That's going to give us some guidance as to how to better plan. Okay, so some key areas of focus, and again, some of this will be repetitive, I think, with what we talked about. And we want to first identify which processes can be disrupted. And Maureen was talking about, everybody would like to make sure that every department and every unit is looked at, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, you want to keep it simple and get it down to those that are really going to have major disruptions. Certain aspects of the operations, maybe you can deal without, or it can run on a low scale for some period of time without major impact to the normal business operations in your business. You want to get to the point where you're identifying those which are really a major threat to your franchise. Then we're going to go through the process of trying to assess how severe that impact is going to be. We'll talk a little bit about this in the developing scenarios that we'll look at to try to kind of test against our operation and against our business. Right. Then we want to identify any potential dependencies. I talked about those between your operations, whether it's inter-department, inter-agency, or outside of your normal flow of business. But things that you depend on, companies that you depend on, that may not be just state agencies, it may be private sector companies that you buy from, or that you get services from. So you want to be able to identify those, help you through this process of assessing what are the most critical ones. And the next thing we want to do is to try to do an assessment as to how long we think each of these that we've identified, disruptions, are going to shut us down, or at least impact us. How long is that going to be? How long can the business really run without those key processes operating? Is it a day? Is it 10 days? If you're talking in the IT realm, which obviously everybody here has some IT functions going on, that could be very crucial. So losing your whole network and infrastructure and be able to do the financial, whatever it is you do, for some, maybe even a day, can be pretty important. Okay. Other things, it might be 5 days, it might be a week, it might be 2 weeks. So what we want to do in this process is to try to determine how long that business can really operate, survive, without those key processes running. Then we're going to identify those critical disruptions and then what potential mitigation approaches might exist for the ones that we identify. If you think about it, we're building a matrix, right? And on one index, we're looking at kind of the severity of that impact. And to some extent, we want to couch that with the frequency. What's the potential effect? And on the other is, it might be a severe event, but it may not affect us nearly as much as maybe another event. So you're trying to focus in on the real top 3 or 5 that can have a dramatic impact on your operations and try to filter that through so that you simplify this process. Otherwise, you'll be doing this forever. You'll be doing this for a very long time. And we want to be able to identify for those critical ones, what are some of the things that we can do in advance and or during and then immediately or following an event to help mitigate against that major disruption and get us back into some normalcy of operations in a shorter order. Then we want to develop what we call the RTO, which is the recovery time objective. Everybody has some sort of an idea as to how long they want to go before they be back in operation. Right? So what is that recovery time objective? What is it that we want to be back in operation to some level of normalcy? Is it 5 days? Is it a week? Is it 5 weeks? Whatever it is. So that's a crucial metric. If you don't do this, then how do you know what you're striving to achieve in terms of mitigation? If your RTO is really something that's less than 3 days, that's going to dictate what you can do and what you need to do to try to meet that objective. If it's a week, if it's 2 weeks, depending on what your constituents' requirement is, and what your business requirements are, then that may that may change your perspective on what you do from a mitigation standpoint. Obviously, may make different costs and outlays and things like that, but it certainly is important in the planning process. And then finally, we want to use this business impact analysis to help drive that BCP, that COOP. Right? We want to use it to help us focus in on the areas that we need to worry about. Not everything, there's tons of things that can happen. If you pick the ones that are potentially likely to happen and have a pretty severe impact, the rest of the stuff is less of a problem. It might be an impact, but it's less of a problem. Again, I use the term franchise threat. I think that's the term to go by. That's going to help you focus. Okay, so talk a little bit about some of the fundamentals of the process. Why perform the business impact analysis? I've answered a few of these along the way. And there's a lot of reasons why you go through this process. Maureen certainly hit on quite a few of them. These are the four I think that really help focus, at least when I talk to my clients. First off, we want to reduce or eliminate the guesswork at the time of the event. We want to have a plan. Just so you know my background, I've been in the fire service, fire protection industry for about, a long time, 34, 35 years. Of that time period, about 20 years of it has been in the volunteer fire service. Up in the north, we don't have a lot of paid services, but we do have a lot of highly trained fire departments that we function. So that's what I've done. I don't do that as much today as I used to. But we used to call it SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. Okay? So we had an SOP book for every event that we went out to in our first two districts. And that basically told us what we were going to do if we had a certain type of event at this facility or at that facility, that location. This is the same kind of thing that we're doing here, a little different context. We want to have a plan so that at the time of the event, and if you've been through anything at all, you know that it's a nightmare. I can't use the word we call it fire service. But yeah, I mean it's nightmare, and things are just falling in heck in a handbasket all around. People are screaming, people want this, people demand this, you got to worry about injuries, you got to worry about safety of employees. There's a lot going on at one time, and it's all compressed in the first few hours of the event. For those businesses and entities that have put together, going through this process, at least have some semblance of a plan of what they're going to do, right? It still was very nerve-wracking. It still is crazy at time going through those first few hours of instruction, but at least they can get through it. They know what they need to do, and they have people sign, and those people know what they're supposed to do. We want to also, something else I think Maureen also hit on this too, we want to ensure appropriate allocation of resources in the crisis. You may not have a lot of manpower, you may not have a lot of available cash on short orders. So your resources that are available for you to try to get the business recovered and back in operation might be few and far between. So in advance, we want to make sure that at least the resources that are available to us, and if we identify we need more, we can go ask for it before the event and try to make sure that it's properly allocated so when the event occurs, we're ready to go. And we have the resources trained and focused where they need to be. All right? And trust me, in every emergency, every disaster, there's always a shortage of resources. Always. Even in the best companies with the best plans, there's always a shortage of resources. And these events typically are bigger than you think. Always bigger than you think. At least the ones that are problematic. Then we want to, another reason that we'll go through the process of trying to outline this analysis, this assessment, this business impact analysis, is really to help us create a more robust testing plan that we'll use when we get through our business continuity or COOP plan to test these. Right? It's nice to have a really well thought out assessment, have some numbers in there, and have some procedures in there, have a crisis plan in there, all that kind of good stuff. But at the end of the day, if it's just on paper and you haven't gone through the trouble of trying to test it out, you might be sadly surprised when the day of the event comes. Because maybe it's not going to work right because you haven't really tested it to determine the things that you can do are capable of being done. You'd be amazed how many problems you find when you test. How do you think about that? So you need to go through this process, and the test plan is a crucial component of that whole COOP and BCP process. It's really, really important. All right, so the business impact analysis helps us get that plan, testing plan put together. Also, it helps us to focus on the business continuity process, that COOP process. It really helps us to focus on what's important. If you just go in and say, I got to tell you, I have clients all the time, and managers go, hey, you know, this client wants a BCP put together, so we want you to come out and help them. Have they done their business impact analysis? Oh, no, they haven't done that. They've done BCP. So the question I always ask the client is, if you haven't done the BIA, how do you know what you need to plan for? That is a guiding document to help us understand where we need to go. So there's really kind of, I like to say, there's 6 kind of key fundamentals inside this process for the business impact analysis. First one is the prerequisite. And Maureen mentioned some of these already. Obtain management buy-in, really important. The way you can do that is by making sure that you sell that stuff. You have to sell this stuff for management. They're going to outlay resources. They're going to give you manpower, time, maybe money, whatever the case might be, to go do what you have to do. So you're going to have to sell it. They're going to have to understand the benefits, why we're going through this process. And then we also, you can help sell that plan by identifying the fact that there may be some other good things that come out of this process. You may identify some obsolete processes that you do today that, you know what, that's 1960s technology. We can not only improve our continuity exposure, but we can also gain more efficiency if we change them. The business impact analysis can sometimes help you flesh that out. Another prerequisite is you got to get in the habit of trying to ingrain this in culture. Now, I know it's a state requirement now, so it's being driven to some extent in a regulatory fashion. But what you want to try to do, you know, as people that are involved in this process, is get it ingrained in the culture. Make this, that's just another thing that you do on your normal course of business. In fact, what I like to tell executives is what they should be doing is every time they sit down with a planning committee to talk about a new product, we're gonna come up with a new product for this market, and we want it to do this, this, and this. That's the time when the business impact analysis should be kind of thought about and discussed in that product planning cycle. And once you do that a few times, they realize there's a big benefit in that because it helps them focus that whole planning process on the product or whatever. And that's how you get it ingrained in the culture. Keep it simple. There used to be an old term, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. So I went down to Richmond, Virginia last year for a client, and a gentleman from Utah came in, the risk manager, and we sat down and said, I want you to meet with the BCP team, be able to see what we've done, get some ideas, etc. So I got there in the afternoon, I got the plan, I took it back, read it in my hotel, and I came back the next day and we went with the team. And first thing I told him, I said, you guys get an A on this, because it was about 14 pages for their whole business. 14 pages. It was pretty impressive. And it wasn't fine like 8 type. It was very well done. And because they kept it simple. And they'd gone through the trouble of identifying those things that were, you know, employee safety related concerns, disaster type things, versus supplier impact for their suppliers that supply them. Of course, they use the supply to their clients. They did an excellent job. So this is really important to try to keep in mind and get into the process of trying to keep it simple. And that's why Maureen was talking about getting it down to just a few key. Everybody thinks their operation is key. Everybody doesn't want to feel like they're redundant, and that's understandable. But you have to, you know, get all that out of the way and say, okay, what do we really need to have continuing so that we can at least meet 60, 70, 80%, whatever your objective is in operation. Sometimes you may wish to consider some sort of a professional lead for your BIA. You know, sometimes it just depends on the intricacy of your business, your entity. I think for your agencies, it's probably not quite necessarily have enough resources into you, but that's something that I always throw out there. Okay, so the second key element here is data gap. So the type of data that's required. Right, so you have to kind of understand up front, going into this process, what kind of data am I going to collect when I do this impact analysis? You know, you're going to break this down by process. That's the key thing, by process. To some extent, it's maybe by department, it's maybe by unit. All right, but what kind of data do I need to gather? And again, you want to keep it simple. Okay? And what you really need is data that's going to help you make decisions as to helping you understand, am my recovery in my BCP process, will that help me meet that RTO or not? All right? So I need enough data to collect to understand that. You're going to need some metrics. You've got to decide what are the key metrics. It might be, your key metrics for the operation might be, depending on what you do. It might be how many, if I'm a manufacturer, so how many products I can get out the door within 3 weeks of the event. In your world, it might be something else. It might be, the number of applications I take or whatever services you provide. It might be the wait time that my constituents have to wait now that they've been disrupted to get whatever service that they normally come to us to have accomplished. So that's going to drive what kind of data you need to collect. We need to consider resolution of that data. How deep in the weeds do I need to go? Remember the term, keep it simple. Okay? But you got to get data that's going to be used. But you want to make sure you don't go over. Data gathering methods. There's always the hills. Questionnaires are good. The VIA team will go in and use questionnaires to ask individuals about their process, their workflow. What happens? What happens step 1, step 2, step 3? What do you depend upon? Oh, well, accounting has to give me this on Thursdays. Whatever it is. It might be a combination of one-on-one interviews, maybe some group interviews. That might be some checklists or, some questionnaires. Okay. Then we get to the third leg, really, the impact assessment. We talked a little about this. Another thing I like to stress here, we're assessing the impact, not the causation. A lot of people want to run off and think about, what's going to cause the event? What's going to cause my loss? We really want to understand, it's less important as to know why the power goes out. And maybe went out because a contractor down the street, hit a 440 line or something like that. What you care about is the fact that my power's out. How long is it going to be until I get it restored, until I get back in operating? So, it's really the impact versus that causation perspective. And then developing scenarios. That's how we go through the process of not only assessing, but also then to use to test it. What I mean by scenarios, you're going to go through the process of identifying those key disruptions that you think are likely for your facility or for your operation, depending on where you are. Some of that might be natural hazard related, flood, ice storms, things like that, quakes. They may be other types of things, maybe fire. Those are some of the more obvious ones. But there could be other things lurking out there because of the nature of what you do. That could be a problem. It could be, I'll talk about the Japan event, but there was a manufacturer that made accelerant pigments that goes into metallic paint finishes for automobiles. They manufactured 98% of the global market, and they were in Sendai, Japan, right where the quick now. So all of a sudden, automobile manufacturers in the U.S., Germany, and Europe, and everywhere else could not get that pigment, could not get the paint. So they had to real quick make up, alternatives for that. And the result was it didn't look as nice. So you saw so many cars. So it can be weird things like that you haven't really thought about. It may not be. Think about this. It may not be a direct impact to you or to your facility. It might be an interdependent facility. It's only the next state that you depend on. That the only company that provides you with the XYZ widget, whatever it is. If you haven't thought about that, what can happen to them? Then that may be something that affects you. So it may not necessarily be just natural catastrophes or fires or things like that. Although those are the obvious ones. Right? So you got to give us a little bit of brainstorming effort and kind of think through the process. Going through this VIA will help you identify if I've got those, what I call pinch points. Those things that everything comes together at one point, and if I lose that point, everything goes to heck in hand. Then we got to go through the process of developing what's the potential severity for those scenarios I've kind of developed. What's the potential for, for those of you maybe that are down in Houston area, for hurricane, right? How bad can it be? For those of you that, how many rode out ice? Some of you got Houston down there, right? Everybody from here? Okay. All right, so I have to think of an event out this way. Flood, maybe flood. So we want to be able to understand what is that severity, what that severity is likely to be, given where I'm located, given the nature of my operations, and what can happen. Okay? Fire is pretty obvious for the most part. If it's a single location building, and I have a fire, meaning the worst case is the whole place goes down. But natural catastrophe events and others may be a little less, maybe less easy to identify. And then assessing the dependencies, I talked about that. So try to make sure you identify or define anything else that you depend upon, whether it's another facility, another agency, or something like that. And recovery requirements, talk about the RTO. That's something that the BIA team will do, or the COOP team will do with that. What is the required time you need to be back in operation? That's going to be based on your business. It's going to be based on your constituents and who you provide services to. If it's a data-related type concern, IT, then we want to establish what we call recovery point. What that means is when's the last successful backup that is sufficient for us? If you're really in a very critical, in a financial particular market, that latest backup might be 3 hours. That's all that they're really enabled to suspend. Anything longer than that, they're really impacted. Yours might be less than maybe longer, maybe a day, maybe 2 days. So that's the recovery point objectives when we talk about IT and data systems, something like that. And then identifying the recovery resources. What are you going to need once you know what the impacts can be and what those disruptions as part of those workflow processes are likely to be? That's going to help you start to identify, okay, what kind of resources do we now need if this event occurs? To be able to make sure that process A and Z and T can get back in operation within that RTO. That could be personnel, it could be manpower resources, it could be cash flow, it could be money, credit, it could be a whole sort of thing. So that's what you're going to try to go through the process to help with that. Then we're going to develop a matrix, and that matrix really should, in some cases, it will address financial related. I'll talk a little bit about the financial performance metrics. But it should also talk about certainly operational impact, how many days you're going to be down, likely to be down for each of these types of key events I've identified, and what is the likelihood of getting back in operation. Could be a regulatory or a legal impact, something you have to do or provide by law, regulation. That says that you have to be back in operation and providing this service within 5 days, whatever it has to be. That would all go in this matrix. And typically, most clients will put it like in Excel spreadsheet or something like that to help look at the multidimensional aspect. And then we're just going to finalize that BIA. Usually it's going to be in some sort of a prepared template report. It's going to have that matrix included in there. And it's basically going to drive what the BCP team is going to take, or the TO team is going to take and develop that continuity plan. We'll synthesize the data. Any tools? I see some clients, but they put in some pretty fancy tools in terms of the what if. So they take that BIA matrix. They say, okay, what if I lose this and my resource I depend upon for recovery over here is out as well? What happens? So I see some clients do something pretty interesting. Key benefits, I think we've all probably hit this one to death by now, but shorter, more focused continuity of operations, more focus on what you really need to worry about. It'll help save time on that COOP planning process, because you're only focusing on the things that are most important. It'll also give you some idea of advanced arrangements you have to make now to make sure those resources that you're going to need are available when the event occurs. If you wait until the event occurs and say, oh my Lord, I got to do this 30 generator, that's too late. Especially if it's Canada, because everybody else is looking for generator. Right? So you have to have those things figured out in advance. You have to have, retention, type of contracts with contractors in place, vendors in place to help you with this, and multiple vendors. Make sure the vendor that you depend upon is also not down the street, suspect to the same event. Okay. And it also enables that integration with culture and the operational planning of our involvement. Those are some benefits. Okay. So let's move into this continuity. I'm going to go through this quickly because I think Maureen's kind of hitting those salient points here, and that's She talked about what a COOP plan is. Really, this action is probably better talked about to be thinking in terms of key elements. These are 4 key elements that need to be part of the whole continuity of the COOP process, right? I talked at length about the BIA. That's kind of the starting point for your process. The disaster recovery plan, the DRP, that is something that deals with systems and IT-related things. That's usually the terminology that's used in that realm. So disaster recovery, if you don't have a disaster recovery plan and you depend upon IT and infrastructure, systems infrastructure, if you don't have a DRP, guess what? This whole thing is going to fall apart. Okay? The business continuity plan is a key element. It's not the only thing. It's a key element, and we're building that off that BIA. And then finally, exercises, the drills, simulations, and plans. Typically, what I like to see with clients is to have them do their testing at least once a year. They do some sort of an exercise, maybe simulation, where they get key departments and stuff involved, kind of like a disaster plan test or something like that once a year. And then quarterly, you do the desktop exercises. And really, desktop is where we sit in a room like this, and kind of the leader of the team will create or essentially have an event, some scenario that he or she concocted, do it on the table, and basically the team has to go to work. Okay, so that's a desktop exercise. You go through the motions. You might make phone calls to suppliers to make sure that phone numbers haven't changed, things like that. And all those kind of little things like that you don't want to find out about on the day you have a meeting. So these are kind of like the key elements that should, let's talk about these real quickly. So the BIA, we hit most of this. We're going to identify and examine that operational aspect of the business to determine the financial impact. If you have a financial concern, we're going to include tangible and intangible types of impacts. And we want to know what processes that we need to worry about. What do we need to protect? What process we need to make sure to stay up and running, or at least get back and running in a short period of time, so that we can kind of prioritize what recovery resources we're going to have to plan. The business continuity plan, again, is an overall plan for that whole comprehensive process of making sure that you're in place to recover and restore, the operations themselves. Would include, roles and responsibilities of different departments, different people in the team, communications, how you're going to communicate this to all the members of the team and maybe all the employees, all the heads of your other facilities, whatever the case may be. And that whole process to take you through resumption of normal operations. I mentioned the disaster recovery plan. It's a written plan providing a details of what has to happen to make sure that your network, IT, and systems can get back in operation just as quickly as possible, right? And this may be the real weak point for your business. It may be the IT, know that you're tending to be more service-oriented. This IT piece might be really crucial, right? So that might be the thing that takes you down. You just can't communicate, you can't provide services, you can't access information, you can't look at data, you essentially can't do anything. Yeah, and here's what we're going to do. Same thing like a BCP. Who does what, when, how do they do it, what resources do we need to accomplish that? And again, it's really built around that whole technology infrastructure. Today, technology is critical for just about any business. Right? Doesn't matter whether you're the private sector or the public sector. Okay. And this is something that also should be tested as well, both by itself as part of the disaster recovery plan, but also in the overall, whole continuity process testing that you do, at least once a year. Okay, so exercises, drills, test plans. I have this again. I can't stress this enough. If you don't test it, it's probably not going to work the way you think when the big day occurs. Should that be? Okay. Also, the plans. You want to share the plans with your constituents, employees, all members of the team, management, maybe outside other agencies. Whatever planning you put together should be accessible, and it should be accessible a variety of ways. Remember, if you have a disruption, more than likely, you're not going to access it through your network at your facility, more than likely, right? So it's going to have to be virtual, it's going to have to be off-site, accessible off-site. And if you don't have that built into this disaster recovery plan, you're going to be in bad shape because you're not even going to be able to access your plan. right? You should be able to do it from your smartphone, car in a parking lot. Right? Okay, so really the purpose of doing the VCP and the COOP, as Marino talked about, is we want to mitigate both before and after disruption occurs. And I say before and after the event occurs. All right, prior to the event, we want to have a pretty positive and upbeat effective risk management strategy. It's going to help us mitigate not necessarily the probability of the occurrence, but the severity of one if it should occur. Not much you can do about a flood or a hurricane in terms of making sure it doesn't happen, right? If it happens, it happens. What you can do, however, is to make sure that, for example, if you're in an area where, once every year, once every couple of years, you get a major regional flooding event that affects your facility if you're in a low-lying area. What you can do is have a plan to make sure all the drains are appropriately cleaned all the time, make sure you have flood defenses in place, whatever that might be, if that's floodgates, things like that. So there are things you can do that reduce how bad that event can tag you when it does occur. So that's prior to the event. Post-event, having an effective business continuity plan helps us have a planned immediate response. We know what we're going to do. When that happens, X, Y, Z. This is what we do. This is who does it. Helps us get in the mode of recovering the critical operation and getting back to normal operation. Some of the added benefits by going through this process is you're creating a more resilient organization or entity. You're going through this whole process, and just by going through this process and identifying the weaknesses and the pinch points and things that can take you down will make you more resilient, right? Because you at least know what has to happen to get you back in operation. And also, if you're in a competitive environment, if your key competitors, this is true in the private sector, haven't done this for their operations, but they're a key competitor to you, it makes you more competitive because you can stay in operation. You can stay in operation to provide your clients with whatever services they're buying. And then, of course, added benefits of regulatory compliance. In this case, it's something that you have to do by virtue of state mandate. Okay, so integrating the BIA into that whole VCP process. So some of the things to think about is, once we put the BIA together, then we're going to identify what are the recovery strategies we might employ to help make sure that we can get back in operation in a short period of time. We might want to do that by department or operational unit, maybe by location. It's going to be different for everybody based on all the things we've just talked about. We like to use a standardized template. The reason for that is to make sure that everybody's using the same kind of consistent approach to it, making sure that they're identifying the right similar types of data, using the same kind of metrics, so that if there's any interdependency between agencies or between other locations, everybody's talking the same language. Right? So it's suggested across an enterprise at least to use a standardized template. Right? In other words, if I go in and I have 5 locations, and I'm going to conduct an analysis and create a COOP plan for that, I want to use a standardized template for each of them. I want to go through and do the same data gathering process here as I do here, and looking for the same pieces of data information. Identifying the procedures. This is part of the process. It's kind of like, if you think about it, it's a workflow. Right? If you're a manufacturer, it's a product manufacturing flow. But in your case, more likely, it's probably a process or human workflow. So it gets down to procedures. You have to identify, do I need to look at my recovery by skill sets? Do I have to worry about skill set requirements for that recovery? Are there certain aspects of that business, that process, that work process, that only certain skilled people can do? If that's the case, you better make sure that that's included, because the key employees may not be available when the event occurs. Maybe it's at night, maybe they're at home, and maybe they're cut off and they can't get in, whatever the case might be. Are the manual procedures, are the technical related procedures where you need to have certain technical resources available? So you need to think through that. I think Maureen might have mentioned about alternate work sites, alternate facilities, right? Maybe you feel you have to have an alternate facility because the threat level for your facility is very high. And it's a pretty high likelihood that if the event occurs, you're out of business. So alternative work sites may be pretty crucial. If that's the case, you want to make sure that you include that in the recovery strategy. And all the different things that go with this are thought of in advance and prepared. For example, if you have certain electrical problems, certain system IT requirements, you got to make sure that that alternate work set can handle it, and that it's equipped to do that, and it's prepared to do that. The company I was working with in Richmond, they had an alternative site, but they had some special injection molding equipment that required certain power demands that alternate site really didn't have. So they couldn't quite figure out what they were going to do for that. So that's how, when they went through this business analysis, they kind of identified that as an area they needed to work on with the recovery stream. Human capital resources, people, manpower. That's probably going to be the most important thing for you guys. So where are you going to get the people if your regular people are not available? Who are you going to get? Other people, other agencies that are maybe not in your vicinity that you can draw upon and help you? Do you have to go out and get temporary help? How are you going to do that? Something you need to think through as a recovery strategy. We want to talk about incident response. This is just a very simplistic chart of kind of an incident response, kind of a procedure matrix, if you will, that takes you through. Once you've gone through the VIA and conducted that and identified those areas you need to provide recoveries for, you need to have some plan in place and some decision tree process that's going to help whoever is holding the business continuity plan that's responsible for that at the time of the event so they can go through that decision process. Okay, you do this, what's next? What if this happens? All right, so incident response is pretty important. And if you remember, I talked about earlier, early on into the event, it's chaotic. At first, you're always worried about employee safety, and things that's obviously a top priority. But once you get that out of the way, then you got to start to deal with more of the business-related types of functions. So you got to have a plan that helps you do this. Depending on the size of your agency or your organization, you may want to have an incident response. It might be that the BIA team is the incident response. It just depends on how big your organization is or how small it is. But the incident response team is initially, their job is to assess what happened, or what's happening, right? Respond to it. Remember I talked about that SOP, standard operating procedure. Evaluate it. Notify key personnel if we have to. They've got to assess. Is this something we got to worry about, or is it a minor thing we can, we're not going to have any business impact from? That's kind of what that the incident response team should be doing. And many companies, it's one of the things. The BIA team is the incident response because they know the process best. They've gone through it. We also usually like to see predefined response triggers. Okay, so again, what if? You got to have definitions and classifications of events. So if it's a major event, that may trigger the BCP. Okay? If it's minor, it just may be some sort of a standard operating procedure that we deal with, and we go back to our daily work. And then, again, this should be a written response type matrix. It helps us define those response paths. And again, it's built like a decision tree. If and gates and things of that nature. I've seen some companies that they put this into simulation software. So that's how they test. Some people group and test. So they say, okay, this happens. They trigger things, and the team has to respond. Okay. And I think Maureen, you might have talked a little bit about this. I'm not sure, but I want to just drill this out. Crisis communication. A lot of companies, a lot of entities have some sort of a communication plan, a program plan today. Some like to call it a crisis communication plan. You definitely should at least have some thought into your whole COOP and BIA about this. Because in today's market, you better be able to do this. From like 5 minutes into the incident, you better be able to deal with the media. All right? Well, how you respond to what you say in those first 5 or 10 minutes can make all the difference from a reputational risk standpoint. It can also have a lot of other dramatic impacts as well. But certainly in the private sector, this is crucial. Anything happens, you always have nowadays somebody that's designated, that's media trained, and that's the other thing. Whoever's going to be dealing with media better be media trained. So they know what to say, when to say it, what not to say, and things like that. Because it can cause a lot of problems as you try to get the business back on the running track, right? It causes a lot of noise, excess noise. Think about using social media. How are you going to use social media? Maybe you do already to communicate to all your employees or agencies, things like that. Think about that. It's a good way to do that. It's a better way to do that. Okay? And to the extent that you can, you want to try to have somebody that's trying to document the incident in progress through the course of the progress. Try to make sure that you're documenting it as best as you can, written on paper, what happened when, times, and things like that. If nothing else, it becomes a great way to debrief what happened after the fact and say, you know what, we didn't think about that in our planning process. Let's revise our plan to address that for the next time. Crisis communication, in my view, is part of this whole BCP process. So in developing it, you want to typically create a plan by a unit, by an organization, by a department. As Martin talked about, try to keep it simple. Just get the most important, critical work processes you have to worry about. Get management buy-off, sign-off, try to get them integrated in the process, and then distributing the plan. You can't go to see it, but that picture there, that's off our website. That's our business continuity procedures that I can get to no matter where I'm at. As long as I have access to the internet, I can get to it. And we've got it virtualized around the world. So any department, agency, or in fact, when we had Superstorm Sandy, we were tagging into this to know where people had to go, where people had to report for claims or just their day-to-day operations. So you need to make sure you distribute the plan. Talk about that over the BCP and the COOP team. In the private sector, we usually have a team of members. I'd like to see kind of a mission statement or a charter. What's their role? What are they supposed to do? What's their authority? What can they do? What can't they do? And then, of course, we have management buy-off on this. Ideally, you want to have members on that team made up from every critical department you've identified in the organization. So you might have 30 units or departments, but there might be 5 critical ones. You definitely want to make sure that the BCP team is made up of people from those, at least those 5, if not some of them. It requires training. It requires resources for training. This isn't something you just sit down and do. It requires some training to understand the process and to do it right and to do it effectively and not waste a lot of time. Business unit integration. If you're in a big organization, it's really best to have, again, the representation on the team from all those different organizations and entities because that helps you integrate that into that business unit. In your case, maybe somebody from IT is on there, certainly somebody from accounting is on there, somebody from personnel is on there, whatever types of areas that you have in your organization.
Hey, Ken?
Yes.
What kind of frequency on training and testing do you normally recommend? Like for testing the program once every couple of years and training maybe annually, something like that?
I like to see, we like to recommend that you do scenario testing. Try to do it annually if you can. It's a big commitment, right? Maureen may have some comments on this, but I like to say you should try to do that once a year if you can. Training, I like to see the training certainly once a year, if not more frequently than that, depending on what's needed.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
As state agencies, we're using Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, which is progressive and sequential.
Yeah.
So start small, crawl, walk, run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, most definitely. I think it may be something that, when you're starting out, annually may be rather difficult, right? But certainly in your first year of operation, you should have done some exercise or testing of some level, right? And training is, that's what you're doing here when you're doing some training.
And
I think training should be.
the policy letter does say that there will be annual exercises. So for state agencies, it's going to be the standard.
Very good. Very good.
So how do you follow and get these trainings prepared? Work through that process.
Well, what most companies do, some companies will record, like we're doing today, will record the actual exercise. And the reason they do this, not necessarily just to prove to people that it's been done, it's more about what transpired during the test. You can, because when you go back and look at the tape, you'll say, oh, yeah, we forgot about that, or that happened, I didn't even pay attention to that. You'll see things you didn't really give a lot of thought to, maybe during the exercise. It's a great way to debrief and identify That's a real concern. We better get that figured out in our plan. So, recording it by tape is a great way to do it, a video or something like that. But there should be some way you're capturing. It's not just the fact that you did it. It's to identify the things that you noticed during the test that didn't work or failed. And then you got to go back to the drawing board, take your plan, and rework it to address those shortcomings. And everybody's going to find. You're always going to find it. Oh, because there's always things that you don't think about. That's part of the reason why I'm going to do testing. Testing's not going to be perfectly real, but if you simulate it effectively, it can be very valuable.
Can I add to that? We just had some ICE days where you could have implemented a business continuity plan at that point in time. You could have activated a call tree throughout your organization and just a very simple documentation of this is the date, this is what happened, this is what we tested. And then you give an evaluation. Did it work? Yes, no. Were people notified? Did people turn up to work when they shouldn't have? Then you find those deficiencies and you work towards improving them.
Yes, yeah, we actually just did that back in December, and we used that as our annual test on call tree. And we were able, what we did is at the end, we took a percentage of how many within each division, like who responded, how many percentage of staff responded, and so forth. And we were able to give that, and I gave that report to executive and our chief of staff and commissioner, so that it just helps leverage buy-in from them and just say, this is why it's important that we do this stuff.
That's a really good point, because we have, an automated, notification system that's driven through our ECP process. And in the last 6 months, we've done one test of that. That's just the notification aspect of it, right? One test, and that's recorded. We've looked at the results, how many people responded, because you have to respond either by, I get it on my BlackBerry, I get it on my personal cell phone, I get it on my home phone. Yeah. I get it on my personal email and my work email. So I get like 5 notifications. It's like my wife said, "Oh, shut that thing off." Of course, in the last 3 months, we've activated it 11 times. We've had to shut the office down. Last week we had a major pipe break, so we had no water in my particular office, so we had to activate it. So, yeah, that's a good point. And so it helps you identify, if the message is getting out there, number one, and if people are actually responding. That's a pretty crucial kind of linchpin in the whole process. If you can't effectively notify all the people that have to be notified in a very timely manner, how do you think who are you going to have to carry your plan for your plan policy? And these are just some of the, I'm not going to go through this, but just BCP testing and exercises, some of the things that we look for, we want to make sure we account for. You notice I listed participants. Right? Part of the test plan that you create should identify what participants do we need to have in the testing process itself. Certainly it's going to be the team, but it may be other participants. You may want to have somebody from our, more than likely you're going to want to have somebody from our management participate in some form of fashion. You may want to have some people participate that the team doesn't know about. Maybe they participate, but not in a very visible way because they're there as plants to maybe, test the resiliency of the process to make sure that, if this happens, are they prepared? So I listed a participant, something you all have to think about when you get through the testing process. Debriefing, that's really, really important. That's the whole reason for testing is to get to this point and take that knowledge and what you've learned and work it back in the process. This is a totally iterative process. Things like that. Okay. So real quick, and I'll finish up this one and turn it over to Chris. So I'll talk about some regional events. I already mentioned you really should include scenarios for regional type events. If some of you may not have as much in the cat realm affecting you, but you should think through this because everybody has some amount of cat exposure. Maybe might be less severe, maybe more moderate. But the plan should really take that into consideration. Think about the constituents, because safety and livelihood of those folks is first and foremost, and then operational continuity next and wrong. Also, you need to think through the process and consider these events because normal alternatives may also be disrupted in the event. If it's a very widespread regional event, if you're dependent upon a location or an entity or a business that's 5 miles down the road, they may not be available. They may not be there. All right, so you need to think a little bit out of the box, and you should be thinking about, okay, maybe a second backup is going to be in the next KO, right? Logistics and infrastructure access may be altered around the service. I'll talk about this in a minute. We'll talk about super understanding. Mobility may be limited. All right, there may be civil authority declarations. Roads closed by the authorities, you can't get around. I went through this, so it's a mess. Give you a real mess. Okay, so that's kind of a backdrop. So, example of some regional events impacting business continuity. This chart I've got on the left here just shows you this is from Munich Re, one of the major reinsurers, of different types of natural catastrophe types events, and it runs it out over the course of about a 40, 50 year, actually 60 year time period. And you can see some of the, what I want you to take away from this graph is what the trend is. What the trend is, all right? And the trend here is not necessarily because we're having more events. It's because we've got a huge population growth going on and development in areas where cats have always been there. That's really what's going on here. It's just because we have a lot more people, a lot more businesses, and a lot more entities exposed in these areas, we're seeing a lot bigger numbers when these events roll through. That's really what's going on. There is some frequency changes going on, but for the most part, it's we're moving the people in the areas that are exposed. That's really what's happening. And it's been a dramatic change in 30, 40 years' time. All right, so now we have a high propensity of a lot of areas. This back here, this is a supplier map for this one company that I work with that shows you the potential impacts and where they have suppliers. Look at that map. They got suppliers all over. So they got to worry about their suppliers going because they're a just-in-time inventory operation. They got a debt. All right, so if companies keep suppliers go down, they're basically shut down for some period of time. Okay, with that said, I can get this thing down. Good. There we go. Okay, yeah. This is a statement up there. It's an increasingly flat in a global economy. A lot of supply chain interdependency going on in everything we buy and do today. And this isn't just true in the private sector, it's also true in the public sector. We depend upon products and services as well. And today, you'd be amazed. Whereas I always love when I go out with my wife and she likes to shop at TJ Maxx. And I walk around like I'm excited to go to TJ Maxx. But I always look at the stuff on the racks and I always look at the labels. I mean, like maybe one says made in the USA. Most of them are some places, unless you're really good at geography, you wouldn't even know where the heck they are, right? So that's what's going on today, and we need to be concerned about it. So we'll talk about a couple of examples real quick. The Tohoku earthquake in Japan in 2011. This was an 8.9 event that occurred just offshore, about 8 miles offshore. It's in what we call the Japan Trench. These three trenches are where we have very significant potential for quake events. So this was not an event that we wouldn't have. This is an event that you could have foreseen of this magnitude, believe it or not. I mean, it devastated Japan, certainly, and kind of the world said, what the heck's going on over there? It certainly triggered a huge tsunami that made a significant impact. Look at some of the stats of what got impacted. In terms of life loss, how many people were destroyed, and these are old numbers, so these numbers will all change now. 4.4 million population, and that's not like a super heavy populated area, believe it or not. It's not like if I went to the northeast of the U.S. where, I could drive 15 miles and catch 5 million people. That's extended electrical power disruption. And what I mean by extended is like a year. Imagine being out for that power for a year. Wow. So that's pretty dramatic. Almost, 1.5 million people without water. You can't live without water. You can't build anything without water. You can't even do the basic necessities of water. So if you look at that picture down below, that's the airport. Send up. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic picture. So this event here, and some of the results of it, it affected so many different industries globally. This was truly a supply chain event. Toyota, Nissan, Honda, they all had huge impacts. For the first month and a half or so after the event, 80% of the production output in Japan in the automotive sector was shut down. 80%. Right? And if you look at global output, and global output was down 13%. Global, 13%. And some of that is like solid pigments that are floating through the system, right? Because they all came out of this plant in Senai. So these are the types of regional events that don't occur that often. You don't necessarily have as much exposure rate where you sit here. You do have flooding exposure. You do have some ice. But this just goes to show you what you need to kind of think about, because the alternatives that you might be planning on may not be readily available to you when you get impacted. Right? So you got to kind of think out of that box and make sure you have like a second tier available to you somewhere outside of your immediate region. And of course, when the quake happened in Japan, all those manufacturers, I mean, and it was a wide variety of industries, not just automobile. It was in cameras, it was in hard disks, those sorts of things that had a huge impact. What do those people do? They would build their operations to Thailand. And guess what happened 3 months after? We had the Thailand flood, which devastated Thailand. I mean, it was a huge event. We took I forget what our numbers, we took a huge loss in the Thailand flood. So many of those firms shipped their manufacturing down to Thailand. The airport there was submerged for 3 or 4 weeks, right? 70% of the floodplain were facilities within 7 industrial states. That's like a big industrial park, like a really big industrial park, industrial states. 10,000 plus manufacturing companies were impacted. 10,000. And this is where we had a significant impact on the camera market and the hard disks and things like that. Out of this follow. Okay. So these are some of the regional events that you're not going to have an earthquake and COOP quake here, but you could have a pretty rather significant flood. And things are changing. So we're looking at different patterns now in weather and weather-related type of things. Brings us to Superstorm Sandy in 2012. By hurricane means, this was barely a hurricane. It was barely a hurricane. It was like at landfall, it was about 75 mile an hour sustained. 74 is your threshold to be called a hurricane instead of a tropical storm. Yet it was 1,000 miles, actually 1,100 miles in diameter. It was huge, absolutely huge. And 1,100 miles where we have sustained winds that can create damage and destruction, right? That's a big, big, big storm, even though it wasn't as powerful from a wind standpoint. The big event here was storm surge. That's what really, and it caught everybody by surprise, including our company. As I mentioned, we had 5 buildings that were impacted downtown. We had sandbagging operations planned and prepared for. They couldn't even get to where the sandbags were stored to be able to bring it in, right? We had buildings that were shut down for 3 months. Now, fortunately for us, most of our people are in claims, underwriting, loss control, and we could move them to another office very easily with their laptops. They could kind of stay in operation. But the damage, the physical damage, the disruption to our normal way of business there was huge. It was a big event. It's the 3rd costliest hurricane in U.S. history. It was barely a hurricane. Barely a hurricane. This is one of the subway. I think it's on the subway. I mean, there was like 11 subway tunnels inundated. And some of the equipment that was in there, the rails and switchgear, they built, manufactured in the 1800s. Wow. They couldn't get replacement. They had to rebuild them. All right, so many of those trains and stuff were out for a long period of time, so people couldn't even get to work. The other thing is the downtown was shut down, so people that were able to get to work, there was no restaurants, there was nothing. There was nothing there, no infrastructure there to support the people that come in every day, right? If they could get, right? So it was a huge major event. Power outages were rather staggering, although the recovery there was pretty good. So I was on a team. We went through and spent the better part of several months, not on site all the time, looking at key locations, and some of the things that we took away, I think are worth mentioning. I think Chris will bring up a little bit about this. Here's some of the things that we found that were problems, not only for us, but for some of our clients that also, were either in our buildings or in nearby buildings. There was a huge need for improved flood defense systems. They were all designed based on a 10 or 11 foot flood level downtown Manhattan. This storm was 14.9 foot. Right? They never had it. It was the most storm surge event ever that they've ever recorded. I don't have the pictures here, but we have a picture of a guy in front of our building on a bike, and he's on his bicycle, and the water's up to his seat. It's just as far as you can see, it's just water. And then beautiful glass structures, just The lobbies were inundated. I mean, several of the buildings, we had $25, $50, $100 million worth of damage, physical damage. And those buildings, the high-rise buildings in particular, have multi-sublevels. So they have 5 or 6 basements. And guess what's down in the basements? All the mechanical, all the switchgear, right? All those sorts of things that were. And the other problem here was because it was storm surge, it was salt water. That's what salt water does to mechanicals and electronics. It just destroys it, corrodes it. So that was something that nobody really thought about. Okay, this kind of salt water intrusion here to that. Fuel storage tanks. A lot of these generators. We had plenty of generators, fixed generators. A lot of them were upstairs, 14th, 15th floor. But all the tanks with the fuel were damaged. And when the flow waters came in, guess what happened to the tanks? They all disrupted and floated. When some of them broke, they broke the piping, and we flooded that water with diesel fuel. So when that happened, we couldn't no longer just pump the water out of the basement, which you think about that. Those basements are 60 foot deep. Think about that, how much water that is. They couldn't just pump them out because New York City wouldn't let us pump it onto the street because it was filled with diesel fuel and contaminants, silt from the East River. So we had to pump it out like truck. That's why those buildings were shut down for 4 months. Yeah, and some of those buildings flooded because they had openings on the sides of the walls for fire department connections, and you had fire department connections. Vents, fuel lines to feed those generators, storage tanks, and things like that. I mean, it was an immense logistics mess, and nobody really kind of thought through this process at all. So we had extended time and cost for dewatering and subsurface. This is true for a lot of companies downtown. I had to deal with this. So that cleanup really delayed the restoration. I mean, we would probably have those buildings back up in operation maybe in a couple of weeks. And in some cases, it went to 3 months, 4 months, because this decontamination process had to happen, right? And nobody ever thought of that in the recovery process plan, right? That's in there now.
Well, aren't they talking about building some kind of dam system?
Well, there's a lot of talk about it, but there's no money for anything, so I don't know what they're going to do. Here's another one. This is an interesting one, too, that we found out. In buildings that weren't, we certainly had water down in the basement, sometimes in the lobby level, but upstairs was full. We couldn't occupy the building because the fire protection system, the alarm systems, were all damaged from the corrosive impact. Right, so we couldn't even the people work up in the safe areas of the whole building was shut down. All right, so that's some of the impacts. So. Just value the concentration of all this critical equipment down below. That's obviously getting changed now. Matter of fact, the New York City Code is going to change on that. Here's another one these are some of the findings and recommendations that we made. Enabling the building managers or property managers to do elevator recall to the second floor, right? Because what happened is that was an area, this elevator car service off are expensive, really expensive. And they sat there, and guess what they do when the fire alarm goes off? They all go to the lobby floor and open up. It's just roll the water with. So, you have elevator banks with 30 cars, right? They're all down there, destroyed for the most part. So one of the things we're looking at is enabling us to turn it and repark them on the second floor once you get the people out of the building. But right now, it's all automatic. Right? Flood defenses, flood doors, drop-in shields. I mean, this stuff is known. It can be done. There's some technology to do this. It just hadn't been. They never thought they were going to have water at that level. Yeah. Let me see here. Elevate critical equipment exposed to salt water. That's it. It's obvious now. It's like Monday night quarterback or two. Okay. Okay. Good. So. There's a whole list of other recommendations we came up with. I won't go through all these, but a couple of key points that we made as a team recommended internally to us. And also we have a report that actually, I was one of 3 off of the report. It's actually going to be available for our clients to get if you want. But some of the things that we found here was very interesting. Funding and financing. We had, if you can imagine, a significant restoration process, the recovery process going on. between our claims people, we had some engineering people on the team, and we had restoration contractors that we had under contract. One of the things that became a real problem real quick, nobody had any access to money, no access to cash. Think about it. Okay, we need to go buy stuff. You can't get down the street and go to the ATM, they're all shut down. So making sure you have access to quick liquid cash is really important. Some credit cards, things like that, that the people that are in the process of recovering have to go and get what they got to get right then and there. Pre-planning, there just wasn't enough of it. Nobody thought about some of these things. Communication, in our aspect, we had to communicate to our tenants that were in our building. Right? Nobody had thought to tell them what we're doing, when we're doing it, and the fact that you can't come back for a long time. Logistics, additional management contacts. This was a real problem. They had a list with phone numbers and stuff. Well, the phone number list had never really been updated recently. We turned people over a lot too, right? So those phone numbers didn't even work, some of them. Or, some people were tired and not available and couldn't get them, so they didn't have a second or third person on that list to call. It was like a tier 1 or tier 2. Right? Food and comfort service, that was a real problem because downtown Manhattan had nothing. No restaurants, no bars, no nothing. Right? So if you wanted to eat, you better run it with you. Or you weren't eating. So that was a problem. Making sure that management now we have a plan that gets supplies and stuff in there early enough so that our recovery teams can eat. And we got cots now so they can sleep. Think about that. Right? Access to lock areas. This was a real problem because 1 or 2 key persons are not available. Maybe they're at home dealing with problems or whatever. And we couldn't get into some of the areas we had to get into. So, right. Security. This is another recommendation for making sure you create tags for your vendors, for your recovery specialists, so they can, not just to get to the building, but to get downtown. You couldn't get it if you got over there. The police had everything shut down.
I can't believe they didn't have any of this shit.
Yeah. I mean, really. Right? A lot of this stuff is like common sense after the fact. Well, think of mail delivery. We had people tied up there for 3 months. Not to get mail delivery because all that was shut down too. The local post office was closed. It was a mess. Industrial hygienists. For our aspect, this would have been something that had we had somebody early on accessible to us would have been great because we had problems with employees concerned about going back into the buildings because of the diesel fuel smell and all that kind of stuff. So we had to brought in industrial hygienists to help go through that and make sure it was safe, and then of course convince the employees to come back. Emergency recovery drills, all that stuff. We had done a pretty good job on some of this, but there was a lot of holes. So it was certainly a learning experience. One last slide I'll leave you with. This is my neck of the woods last year. I think this was Storm 10. This is about 10 miles from me. That's just a picture I took out of a little paper. But this shows you the impact area. Here's Philly. I live right here in Chester County, Pennsylvania, right over the line from Delaware, where my office is. And these here is the Topeka, the local utility supplier. And these are the counties that they had impacts in. And what you can't see here, this one, Chester County, we were 70% of customer base was out of power. 70%. 67% here, 50-60% here. This whole area was absolutely devastated. And the power, they just restored the power before the day we got the blizzard. We had blizzard Thursday, right? The power finally got back on Wednesday. And I saw crew trucks there from Illinois and all over the place. Right? But one of the things I wanted to bring up, because I know that your state agencies and stuff, we had a 1/2 to 3/4 ice accretion. Right? So if you know anything about ice, some of you down here have had ice problems. When you get the 1/2 ice accretion on lines, usually that's when the lines start to bow up, where after a week they'll start to come down. If you get a 1/2 or so on branches, that's when the trees and the branches start to come down. Pine trees are a real problem. Pine trees, because of the fine needles they all collect, and it's so heavy, they all come down. I mean, there was a ton of pine trees in my area now, stuff like that. So this was by any stretch of the imagination not the worst ice storm you can have, but it was pretty significant. Caught a lot of people by surprise. So we had about 3/4 of a million people without power, customers without power. Two major colleges and universities were affected for 4 days. They were not prepared at all. None. They had some emergency generators in some of the key buildings and things like that, but it happened that about one university has an 8,000 student population on site, live on campus. Those that could leave left. The problem was the roads were bad, the transportation was down, they really couldn't get out very easily. The parents couldn't get there even if they lived locally. So they had those people, they were staying in unlit dorms. No lighting, no power. I mean, it was unbelievable. Right? Can you imagine your kid being in there? So for 4 days. And they did have some generators in a couple of buildings, they did move people. They had a low security staff presence at the time of the event, so the extra security couldn't get on campus. And guess what else they did? Food. Food. I don't know about any of you have any college kids around here, but I went through this with 2 college kids. That's all they do is eat. Yeah.
Co-ed?
What's that?
With the co-ed?
Oh, yeah. 2 college. Oh, yeah.
And I just want you to know that that will never happen in Austin. We will shut down long before the ice.
We also had hospitals in action. One hospital was actually shut down. They sheltered many of them in places they did use some of the workers out to the local hospital. So that was like for 2 days. It was about 7 days for complete restoration. So, you know, just there's the thing to show you that you better make sure that if you have a natural cat event exposure where you're at, you better make sure you think about these kind of regional events because, you know, if you look at this, it's a pretty good size area of impact. And if you're depending on anybody else in this area, more than likely they will without power. They couldn't get even if they had power, they couldn't get there because the road was totally iced in. Okay. All right, I blocked out the university. But that looks like my street. That's what my street is.
So we know it's in Chester.
I didn't say that. I said it in Chester County.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, but anyway, there's students, 8,500 on campus. There were almost 4 days.
What says go Hoyas?
No lighting, security. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was all over the news. Talking about medication.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. So anyway, I know I went over, but I'll drop the questions, and then Chris wants to come up and talk over them too. So, do you want me to field questions now, or?
Yeah, well, let's quickly get his presentation ready.
No questions?
If you do have any questions, please remember that little card that's on your table. If you have any that you think you're comfortable asking out loud, write them down in the question box right here next to the podium. I'll put it over there and you can put them in. So I shall hand this off to Emily to read it.
I promise we'll be done by 4.
Ready, go.
That's the most exciting part.
I have to go to work.
So, just to kind of bring everything full circle, we talked a little bit in the morning about property insurance, what the purpose was, and I wanted to connect the property insurance into the business continuity, because there's a lot of correlation between the two. So that's what my brief presentation.
Oh, that's it.
Oh, that is it?
Okay.
Alright, so we'll do that. So business continuity elements of property insurance coverage. There, after you have an event, so let's say a fire, a hurricane, something triggers physical damage. After that event, you may have a lot of business income elements, or time element coverage, as we call them, that essentially cause additional damage that you may not think of necessarily before you had a loss. And Ken did a great job of walking through some actual examples of these things, but what I'm going to do here on this page, you can see certain coverage elements and how they're defined for us insurance laws. I'm going to give you some examples of what they mean. So first is extra expense, and basically what that is let's say you were shut down, needed to go to a temporary facility. let's say your MOU that a partner facility you went to, for some reason was also shut down. You may have to rent a temporary facility. You may have to rent a portable, as an example. For school districts do that a fair amount, but anything that's an expense you didn't have before the loss, but now you have additional expenses, say maybe it's overtime, that you start to expend, those are covered as part of property insurance. Expediting expense, let's say that you needed to make the repair extremely quickly, and there was one element, let's say you lost power, and there's one part of a generator that was shut down, you need to pay to expedite this one part that you can only find in Germany. It costs $1,000 to do that. There's something called expediting expense, and what that does is it provides additional funds for you to expedite the repairs and hopefully get back to operations quickly. Third part, business interruption. This is really your loss of revenue. So depending on your agency, you may or may not have revenue exposure. If you have revenue generating activities such as universities, an easy example where they charge tuition to their students. If they don't have operations, they can't charge that tuition. That's a resulting loss of revenue. They also have football stadiums. You make a lot of money on concessions and different things and tickets for alumni. So that would be an example of a public sector loss of income. And during that ice storm example that Ken had thrown out, if the university shut down and is gaining this potential classes, then they may have some loss of revenue. Emergency vacating expense is an interesting one where a couple of the examples Ken mentioned actually could come into play, where you have those students that are basically locked in a dorm room that's operating on not locked. Shut inside a dorm room that has no power. There could have been additional expenses from the university to actually move those students outside. They may, depending on how their leases work, they may actually be responsible for transporting those students. That's an extra expense, or maybe housing those students. Another example that we actually had, this was for a public sector client. They had a detention center facility where they have prisoners inside that facility. They had a big tornado come through, damaged part of the facility, and so that part of the facility wasn't locked down secure. So they actually had to ship those prison mates to another prison, what happened to be a for-profit prison. So the for-profit prison basically charged almost a room rate for every single prisoner. So that's an extra expense that you don't think about, but could be part of it. And service interruption, if you had a lack of power, that can certainly lead to disruption. And utilities, even basic things like cable phone systems, that could also result in loss. And one last thing that's not on here that Ken mentioned as well is civil authority. And what that is your site itself may be prohibited to actually access that location. If you think of an example like terrorist attacks of 9/11, the entire surrounding area for where the terrorist attack happened was shut down. So businesses went under. There was no activity. Even if your building wasn't necessarily impacted, because of the event, the authorities were preventing you from actually accessing that building. So that's another example. And I thought I would tie it back to just walking through the exact claims so you can see how these different items play out. So I also put a little note up here that I thought was funny. I don't think anyone else will, but I like the stuff. Does anyone know what a superstorm is? Any idea what this? I don't know what a superstorm is. The superstorm it doesn't actually exist. It was, how meteorologists make everything sound so exciting and fascinating. Apparently, Superstorm Sandy sounded really good, and it sold, probably some media. So, also, you can see this professor of something important. I don't know on Google, so it's on the internet. It must be true. He says Superstorm is a media invention. There is no real meteorological term called superstorm. So what it really was, it was a hurricane. It got downgraded to a tropical storm. It actually got downgraded past that to be a post-tropical storm. The post-tropical storm Sandy doesn't sound very good. Anyway, superstorm is But if you took an example where you had a hurricane come through, and hurricanes is a good example of widespread damage, but the same financial losses could apply with a tornado, even ice storm, as an example. So you'll have a lot of financial losses, and really the purpose of insurance is, as part of the business continuity framework, is to provide you funding to offset the financial losses that associate with an event. So pre-loss, let's say Hurricane Sandy, you know is coming, is going to directly impact your agency. First thing is property preservation. So you may invest money in things to protect against the possible damage. So that could be anything from boarding up, putting shutters on your windows, boarding up windows is a common example for hurricane. And those are costs that ultimately you're trying to prevent losses from happening, but that's something insurance companies do pay for. It ultimately mitigates the loss, and that's part of the insurance coverage. Also evacuation, which is similar to the patients that you have to relocate patients with your healthcare organization. Could be students, could also be prisoners, in my other example. Then you have the actual physical loss itself, which would be the damage to the assets. So the physical destruction or flooding from the wind, maybe pulling windows out, to the actual loss itself. And then we have the post-loss events. So you have interruption of power, yes, resulting loss of revenue, and additional expenses. You want to obviously maintain operations, so any additional costs it takes. So when you are in an insurance program, what happens is the financial costs of all of those elements we just talked through are transferred to a third party, being the insurance companies. The pre-loss and preservation of property, the example of boarding windows, those are costs that instead of your agency paying for those costs, the insurer comes in and stabilizes your costs and offsets that. The physical loss, you're going to get a repair replacement for the building damage. So let's say your building had half its roof damage and it needs a roof replacement. Well, that's something that the insurance company is going to pay for to have with lifetime and quality. I know there was an example that was brought up earlier about sort of historic buildings. There's questions over here. So if you had a historic building, the lifetime and quality issue, I think it was Steve that mentioned it, it's a little bit trickier, and you have to have specialized coverage in place. Luckily, through the SORM program, it does offer broader coverage that provides not only just to the capital went down to put something that looks similar to the capital in place, it actually provides additional costs to keep the sort of historical nature of that damage. So that's the physical loss element. Post-loss, these are a lot of the additional examples that were oftentimes are sort of not thought of up front, but they are additional costs that continue to accumulate. Extra expense in the public sector tends to be the larger of the two compared to loss of revenue. You typically don't have a large loss of revenue potential, but extra expense is really key because ultimately you're here to provide a product and service to the state of Texas, and in order to keep those operations going, you'll do pretty much anything to make sure that that continuity exists. So that's really the key post-loss coverage that insurers pay for. And that was it. So just in summary, any questions on that? And I'll sort of summarize to wrap up. And look, I have 3 minutes, so I'll only take one. So we remember back to the initial property insurance discussion, really why it's here. It's not to protect against the small stuff, it's to protect against the big stuff. And ultimately, by purchasing insurance, yes, it is a cost, but it's a stability cost. Basically, you pay a known fixed amount each year to avoid an uncertain, potentially large amount. And then in terms of risk assessment, try to figure out of all these different doomsday scenarios that your agency actually could be exposed to, that's really what SORM's there for you, is to provide guidance and help answer any questions you have. So that is it.
I'll do a formal summary over the whole topic, if you don't mind. And then say thank you to you guys. Many of you are brand new
either risk managers or you've been given this business continuity role, and you sat through this morning's sessions, and you might be thinking, well, what's subrogation got to do with me? Why are we learning about these building values? As you go through this COOP plan, there's going to be expectations from you to gather that data. So what may not have seemed extremely clear to you today, don't throw away those fantastic resources that you've got, that were out on the table, that were given to you, because it will help you address potential exposures that your agency has that you may not think you need to know right now. The subrogation information, that's helping you to look at your third-party vendors that you may need to be working with as part of your COOP plan. And how are you going to make sure that you've got contracts that look into what they need to be doing for you and looking at their business continuity plans to make sure that they're available to assist you when your agency goes under. We did the benefits of the property program. There's a certain point, once you've identified what you own, where it's located and how much it's worth, you're going to have to do a financial feasibility study in your own agency. If you're unable to retain that risk within your budget, you may look at the possibility of transferring it through insurance. So we've shown you where that opportunity is opened up for you, and you'll be able to utilise that program if needed. Equipment breakdown, they did the section on all of the servicing, trying to mitigate losses, because just as business continuity and COOP can be affected by catastrophic losses, they also pointed out, just by a chiller going out, just by the air conditioning going out, your agency can be stopped. If you're not looking at those potential exposures inside your agency, that could also shut you down. And maybe one of those little tests that you do during your COOP testing. And finally, we went through the COOP. We gave you how to get started. Many of you are brand new to this. You might have plans on the shelf that others created that you are trying to take and revamp or build up. We gave you some steps on how you can start. So we hope that this entire day will be able to be pulled together in different parts of your program to assist you to develop the best program for your organisation. So before we leave, I have one person sitting in this room who has done an absolutely incredible job to pull this all together. Cheryl Kelly. Doing the organising, getting us lunch, making sure we were fed, checking the room, making sure toilets were working. She did everything, and she did it so quietly that no one could see you. So thank you to her, and to my work colleague Kyle Harwood, who is, I've got him working, he's out on the road doing building inspections, so he couldn't make it today. But it's been a very successful event. Thank you all for attending. Happy birthday, Chris, and I've got 2 final raffle tickets to draw.